Thank you for thank you for joining us. I'm Clark Ziegler. I'm Executive Director at MHP, and I just wanted to say a few words about why we're here today and what we hope to accomplish. I'm sure most of you know, when MHP was created in the 1980s, part of our core mission was helping cities and towns advance best practices in the development and preservation of affordable housing and giving communities and community leaders the tools they need to address their own unique housing needs. So that has brought us frequently, constantly to gateway cities to assist in various ways, and particularly in times of crisis. I think MHP was particularly engaged, in the 90s when we had a huge vacancy and abandonment problem during the foreclosure crisis, where we worked a lot with local housing courts and receivership. There are a lot of instances where we've been needed. We've tried to be there for gateway cities to fill some gaps. Part of our work brought us to establish the Massachusetts Housing Institute about 15 years ago. It's a 2-day program, been very successful. I think we're over 1,500 local officials and local leaders who participated at this point. And when we did a listening tour in the spring and asked for feedback about how MHP could do better, one of the things we heard loud and clear from gateway cities is that the Housing Institute had sort of morphed. The attendance really skews pretty heavily toward suburban communities, smaller towns, rural towns, and there wasn't as much participation or as much content for gateway cities as there ought to be. So we decided to act on that feedback, and our community assistance team put together this series of 3 sessions for our Gateway Cities Housing Institute in a way to try to not to duplicate any of the great work other partners are doing. We've got partners like MassHousing with the Neighborhood Hub and more recently the Neighborhood Stabilization Fund. We have Mass Development and TDI. We have Mass Inc., Boston Fed. There are a lot of partners out there that have been really working intently in gateway cities. So we just wanted to try to put together some content that we think really adds value, shares best practices, gets conversations going. And we're hoping that this is responsive to all of your feedback, that it's helping meet some of your needs. And based on how this goes, we will kind of keep at this and refine this work and try to be good partners with you to help you really think through what you're doing in your own communities. So we're excited about this. We hope it's useful. We want to hear from you about how it's going, and very excited to be doing this. So with that, I will turn it back to Christine.
Clark, for that introduction, and as Clark said, we're excited to offer this Housing Institute specific for gateway cities. I myself, coming from mass development, know that how important it is that we also focus on these regional hubs as while we're doing our work in affordable housing. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first session speakers. Can you all still see the screen?
Yes, we look very good.
Okay, so first up we have Don Bianchi from MACDC. Don is a senior policy advocate at the Massachusetts Association of CDCs. Much of his work is focused on supporting MACDC's members in their affordable housing and real estate development work. Don has over 30 years experience in affordable housing development, lending, and policy. Also joining us this morning is Francis Floor. Francis Goyce Floor is the manager for the Neighborhood Hub, the Commonwealth's technical assistance program for the neighborhood revitalization. Prior to joining MassHousing, Francis worked at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and the World Bank. She recently became a first-time homeowner of a condo in a historic brownstone in East Boston. Congrats, Francis. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks, Clark. I'm Don Bianchi from MACDC, as Christine said. We're very pleased to have the opportunity to highlight the strong partnership among the Neighborhood Hub, the City of Holyoke, and OneHolyoke CDC. This partnership is essential to this initiative's success. I wanted to, as Christine noted, introduce our other presenters. Erin Vega is the current director at the Office of Planning and Economic Development for the City of Holyoke. Erin served 8 years as the state representative for the City of Holyoke, and prior to that served as an at-large member of the Holyoke City Council. He lives in Holyoke with his wife, Deborah, son, Odin, and their cat, Colleen, in an historic row house. Michael Moriarty has served as executive director of OneHolyoke CDC since 2013, dedicated to the organization's mission of transforming distressed neighborhoods and improving lives for residents of the City of Holyoke. And Lynn D. Sweet has over 35 years of real estate experience and is the founder and principal of LDS Consulting Group, LLC. Lynn has consulted both private and public sector clients on planning, market research, feasibility analysis, financial structuring, grant writing, land use and permitting, team building, and project management. She currently serves affordable senior and market housing industries, as well as smart growth and mixed use developments. Lynn holds an MBA from Babson College. Just a couple of logistical things. We will leave time for questions, and which we will get into after the presentations. But at any point, please put your questions that you have in the chat, and we will ask them when we get to the Q&A portion. The other logistical thing is just to ask people to stay muted unless they're speaking. So I think that's it for me, and I'll turn things over to Francis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Don. It's so nice to see everybody. Some familiar names popping up and others that I don't know. So it's very exciting. I have a short presentation to share with you all about the work that we're doing with the Neighborhood Hub. And let me see. Okay, can you see? Full screen presentation should be on. But yes, my name is Francis Flor, and I'm the Neighborhood Hub Manager here at MassHousing. Just to start, a little bit about MassHousing, in case you're not familiar with it. We are the quasi-public agency, independent, created by the Mass Legislature in 1966. And we provide financing for both the creation and preservation of affordable housing, as well as affordable home mortgage loans to home buyers. We work statewide, and in addition to our primary work financing, we also provide some technical assistance. And that technical assistance, part of it is the Neighborhood Hub. And the Neighborhood Hub is really, it showcases how when there's a lot of teamwork, collaboration, and perseverance, you can really get things done. So it started in 2019 with a lot of research and lobbying from MACDC, Mass Inc., and the Gateway City Caucus. Because really, when you look at it, there are two sort of housing crises in the Commonwealth, right? One is that prices are very high, especially around greater Boston, and folks are getting displaced, places are getting gentrified. The other housing crisis is that our housing stock is older, it is aging, and there are, especially in communities of color and in our cities or gateway cities, there are serious issues with the actual housing structures or homes that are abandoned. And you read about it sometimes in the news, or you see a house that goes up in flames or that collapses, and this is another very real problem that this group of folks wanted to get together and get some funding behind to bring it to attention. So through that work, the legislature actually approved $750,000 for neighborhood stabilization technical assistance. That was in 2020. And when they approved that, I got an email from my boss and executive director of MassHousing, Crystal Cornegay, saying we need to do something about this. And that is how the Neighborhood Hub was born. And it started, we started working on the program and what it would look like in 2020. Obviously, 2020 was a rough year and a difficult time to get things moving, but I'm happy to say that we launched the program and have continued to receive funding from the legislature. So it's very exciting because we can provide support to a variety of gateway cities now and hope to continue to. And again, if this is something that you care about, you should always contact your legislatures. Now, the goal of...
Answers.
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but your background noise is quite loud. Is it possible?
I don't know. Is that any better?
That's much better, yes.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thank you. Let me know if there's anything else I can do. So the goals of the Neighborhood Hub are to support the revitalization of neighborhoods with a high rate of vacant, abandoned, or underused housing structures. Also, through providing equitable technical assistance for interventions tailored to the needs of local communities. By equitable, we mean that we operate within the knowledge of historic disparities that exist in the Commonwealth, historic disparities that exist between different racial and ethnic groups, and this program intends to support those that have gotten the worst and that have gotten the least help and have received most of the burden, both through COVID-19, the Great Recession, and other complicated moments. And finally, we want to encourage partnerships between municipalities and their local or regional community organizations. So it's a three-part goal structure that we work with. Now, the details to the actual program, it's a 2-year partnership. So it's 2 years in that municipalities can work on a specific issue within a neighborhood around homes that are in disrepair, empty lots that could be turned into homes. If there are specific programs already around either lead reduction or upgrades to the homes themselves, we work with you and provide technical assistance to improve those things. We work with both municipalities and their local partners. This is all about collaboration. So we know that it's easier to get things done when people work together. So not only do we encourage, but we do require local partnerships. We provide up to $100,000 in technical assistance. And again, our preferences are for COVID-19 impacted communities and 2008 recession impacted communities, those that had the most foreclosures and vacancies as a result. And like I said, this is all about collaboration. So not only do we want collaboration through our municipalities, but we also want we also have collaboration within this hub advisory itself. So while I am the program manager, I work closely with MassInc, with DHCD, with MHP, with Mass Development, at the Attorney General's office, because all of these folks, we're all doing similar work in the Commonwealth. And again, it just makes more sense to work together so that we can combine programs where needed. We can assist with grants or TA to really make these programs really leverage what we have to the most of our capacity. Now, the different themes that have come up through the Neighborhood Hub for programs are really 4. I'll start with organizational improvements. So that's supporting the actual organizations, whether it's the city, whether it's the redevelopment authority, a CDC, improve their own structure as an organization in order to better address these challenges. So for example, in Brockton, most of the work is geared towards NeighborWorks housing solutions to become more nimble so that they can purchase, rehab, and sell structures that are smaller in size than what they're used to. So they're working with they usually work with structures that are 40 plus, 50 plus units. We're working with 2 to 3 unit structures and seeing how they themselves need to change as an organization in order to be able to do that. We also support reuse plans and strategies, and this is the work that Aaron Vega and co in Holyoke will speak about. But It's the creation of plans for specific neighborhoods or other areas that have a high rate of homes that are vacant, abandoned, or in need of repair. In addition to working with Holyoke on this, we're working with the City of Fall River. They're actually putting together an urban renewal plan with a greater component of housing linked to it in order to do this work. We also support regulations and incentives. So at the City of Fitchburg, we're working to upgrade their regulations around vacancies in housing so that the properties don't sit vacant as long as they have been. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that we are incentivizing. So we're also thinking of, okay, what does a funding program or a TA program look like for those owners to make repairs in their homes or to put those units back on the market. And lastly, the most pre-development work we have is property ID and prioritization. So that is actual identification of specific properties, and this is something that Holyoke is doing too, to really just have a clear, crisp list of these are the things that we need to work on, and this is how much it'll cost, and that way we can get the different funds that are around, financing, subsidies, etc., developers to come in and do that work. So really putting pen to paper and moving those projects along. Like I said, right now we're working with 5 different communities. So we have Malden, we have Brockton, Fall River, Holyoke, Fitchburg, and it's been less than a year. It's been around 8 or 9 months that we've all been working together. And you know, one of the big takeaways from this program and the work so far is that neighborhood revitalization, neighborhood support, vacancies, they look different in every place, right? Every city has its own market, has its own neighborhood dynamics. So we want to make this program as nimble and flexible as possible so that it can be a place where gateway cities can come and get the support they need without having to fit tightly into one specific box. Now, as part of this program, we wanted it to be more than just, you know, here's the money and good luck to you. So we do have try to have a support network. So I have check-ins regularly with each city team. So again, that's not just the one planner, but it is the CDC, the redevelopment authorities, the housing authorities, etc. Whoever is supporting this program to make sure that we're on the same page. We also have bi-monthly to quarterly check-ins with all the teams to make it a space to share practices, to share challenges, and really support each other. I try to send newsletters, but really it's just like emails sometimes with upcoming opportunities, whether those are webinars or news related to neighborhood stabilization work. And we do have an annual webinar. We just had it in October to showcase different stabilization efforts across the Commonwealth. And we have this and last year's recorded webinars online if anybody is interested. And the big thing that I wanted to talk about is that we are now accepting applications for the next round. So I'm really excited to say that since we have continued to get funding, we are opening it up to another cohort. We are looking again at 3 to 5 communities to support. And it'll be fun because they'll join the 5 communities we're already working with. The application is all online. You can see it at masshousing.com/neighborhood hub. The timeline is right there. You can see it, but it is open until December 3rd. And it's, I talk about how we prioritize COVID-19 preference and recession preference, but really I have a map online through the neighborhood hub that you can see what the different preferences are, where you can look at the specific tracks, QCTs, and environmental justice preference tracks to really see where your neighborhood, where your city is. And this year we're opening it up not just to gateway cities, but also interested in regional applications with a gateway city. So for example, in Springfield can partner with one of their next door communities if if the interest is in a neighborhood that goes to that is shared between them. So we know that just because the boundaries of a specific city are defined, we know that many times, there are shared elements with that in other cities. So we want to make sure, again, we're working collaboratively and having that be an open option for cities if they want it. And that is all I have. So thank you y muchas gracias. And I will leave both my email and the link for the application on the chat, and I'll be here to answer questions afterwards too. And I hope you heard all of it, and thank you.
Thank you, Francis. That was great. And now I will turn it over to our team from Holyoke. We have Aaron Vega, Lynn Sweet, and I don't know if Michael Moriarty has joined us, but they are going to provide a presentation on their collaborative effort in the city of Holyoke. So take it away, whoever is going to take it away.
I got it. Thanks, Don. Good morning, everybody. Aaron Vega here. So I'll give a little context before we go through the slides. And if Mike isn't here, I can cover for him. He'll owe me. So Lynn, just thank you for your work on this. Well, actually, I was going to say thank you, but then I saw that one picture you have of me in that slide. It looks like I'm about to punch somebody. I don't know if that's good or not, but thanks to Lynn and her team for everything. This has been a really interesting project, great project to work on. So for context, I've been in this position for almost exactly 9 months. I started January 25th. So this project was sort of in the pipeline, or was already application was already approved. And so I was able to kind of take it right from the start. And we brought on LDS Consulting, Lynn, who's with us, and it's just been great to work with her. It was actually my first time getting an RFP answered and bringing on a consultant. So that was a great experience, and it's been great working with Lynn and her team. So a couple things, for context here, Holyoke, as most of you know, one of the original gateway cities, and we are in the position of utilizing every opportunity that's out there. So I know it was mentioned in the beginning, we're applying for a new TDI fellow. We've been doing the rapid recovery plan. We have an urban renewal plan. So plans we have and plans we continue to work on. And so we really try to take advantage of every opportunity mass development, MassHousing, and any of the quasi agencies at the state level have out there. Obviously, I advocated them for 8 years to be funded, and now I'm utilizing them. So it's a great kind of connection there. And then just a quick little backstory too, that's not necessarily in this program, but for the people who are economic development directors and planners, sometimes we get focused on the big game, right? And so, we're really excited to have wind development here, creating 86 units of housing, taking over an old mill, huge project, $40 million project, transformative. But the reality is that as I look out my window here from my office, I have 2 gentlemen, brothers, that 8 years ago weren't even on the radar for the city of Holyoke as developers, but dedicated to the city, lived here, wanted to do more, bought a building, created those partnerships with the city, with the state. Holyoke Community College ended up putting their culinary department down in their building in downtown on Ray Street. They have 15 units of market rate housing that has not been empty once since they opened up. And now we're working with them on another project. So sometimes we have our eyes focused on sometimes the big developers and the big names, but often the homegrown developer is really what's important. We really can change a neighborhood. And that's why this program is so important, because it puts in context the reality of what is needed to stabilize those neighborhoods. It's not always about creating 86 units of housing in one mill building. It's about filling in spaces, taking over abandoned properties, abandoned buildings in neighborhoods, and really creating stabilization. And so that's really been excited about working on this project. So as was mentioned, partnerships are key. And we at OPED, the Office of Planning and Economic Development, like most of you, have capacity issues. So without a program like Neighborhood Hub, we can never do this work. I see a friend and former employee here, Claire Riker, is on the call, so she knows exactly what I'm talking about. Great to see you, Claire. Capacity for our offices is often an issue, and we can never do this work. So what did we do? So we had our goal to identify locations for housing development in South Holyoke and the Flats neighborhoods of Holyoke, basically our downtown neighborhoods right along the river, also mixed in with a lot of industrial. So of course, we had a great kickoff meeting. As I mentioned, we brought in LDS Consulting Group. And what was so fantastic about their presentation, because we had other applicants, of course, but they were really wanted to be on the ground and do an on the ground analysis, and then of course take that information and do it into a GIS mapping interface system. And so just knowing that this group and her team wanted to be in Holyoke doing the work on the ground was really important to us. Again, creating those relationships, even in the time of COVID, right? So it's really great that we can all Zoom and get together, but again, having those personal connections and on the ground interactions was really important. So you'll see they are creating some base maps. Again, as someone new to the world of GIS mapping, it's just amazing to see what can be done in the map. So I want to give a shout out to Nels, who's the GIS director that works with Lynn. It's just really fantastic to see how much information we can get into these maps. In addition to getting that inventory in these neighborhoods, we were able to also sort of identify 5 locations within the neighborhood hub study area to really think about multi-use, mixed-use developments, so some underutilized properties. And so we've had some conversations with the building owners, and that's sort of a second stage that we're able to expand from our original application. Many, as you know, stakeholder interviews, landlords, developers in the area, people that have been through the system, people that have utilized tax credits, low-income tax credits, people that have tried to do it with private money. So lots of stakeholder interviews to get all that information and all the different experiences of what it's like to develop in downtown Holyoke. And one of the things I'm really excited about is one of the final products that will come of this is sort of a toolkit for developers. As people understand, if you're in similar roles in similar offices, we're not brokers, we're not real estate agents in our office, and people only come to our office when they need something. But if we have the ability to sort of work with our local developers and give them a toolkit and say, here's the opportunities for funding, here's the opportunities for state programs, and here's a list of properties that we really think could be developed, maybe some quick pro formas of what it may cost, but giving them really the information up front, and get them to develop some of these infill, these empty lots in these neighborhoods can really be a powerful tool. So they're not wasting time looking for stuff. We're not wasting time trying to figure things out. We can bring it all together with that toolkit. So we partnered also, as was mentioned, with OneHolyoke CDC. And so they're also have a bunch of properties in the neighborhood there. So some of the supplemental services or additional scope of work was we were able to create an asset map, capital needs map, if you will, for many of the properties that for OneHolyoke CDC created. They used to be called Old Holyoke back in the day, but it's a new day in Holyoke. So, and giving them sort of the assets and sort of an overview of what they're going to need. We are really looking at, as many gateway cities, especially those 5 locations that we've identified, really thinking about how we can have the sort of mixed use, right? Residential on the top floors, commercial, community spaces on the ground floor. A little bit on the edge of the proper study area are high and main streets. Again, that was how it was built. It was all built with residential on the top floors, commercial on the ground floors. How can we bring that stuff back? Knowing the challenges that we have with retail, how can we bring back and infill those spaces? And so pretty exciting that, in the last year and a half, we've had 5 new restaurants open in downtown. We do have some housing projects, but we all know that there's a housing crisis that was pre-COVID, and we definitely have a housing crisis in Holyoke and in Massachusetts now. So there's our study area, pretty big area, as you can see, encompasses much of our downtown, as I mentioned, along the river. As some of you may know, Holyoke, the first industrial planned design city, captures an 80-foot drop in the Connecticut River. We have a 3-level canal system. And so this really was workforce housing. This is where people worked who lived in downtown, worked in the mills. And so traditionally, again, like I said, workforce housing, people raising families. And so how do we bring that back? Obviously, as you can imagine, a lot of the tenement buildings, a lot of the large buildings are gone. There's been, some construction that happened in the late 60s, early 70s. But again, not a lot happening since then. We've been lucky to work with our Holyoke Housing Authority and work on a South Holyoke Homes project. But again, it's been sort of a years of neglect and disinvestment in these neighborhoods.
Erin, do you want me to step in now?
Sure. Yeah, Lynn, come on in.
Great. Hi, Lynn Sweet, LDS Consulting Group. Really happy to be here and be part of this panel, and more importantly, be part of this project. So when we were, I think as Erin mentioned, the project was on the books before he came in the door, and we came in a little bit later, but we were really fortunate that we had already actually been working in Holyoke with OneHolyoke Homes, actually in this neighborhood as well. So we had some background as to the challenges and the opportunities in these two neighborhoods. So our first piece of work was to identify what the study area was. And in this particular instance, sort of the red outline is the study area. We cut out a lot of the industrial on the edges. And we had one of our staff members, along with our GS person, we created something like 40 or 50 data points for every single property, and literally walked every single block in the middle of the summer. First day, it was great. Second day, she needed a lot of water. To talk about the existing conditions, because you really can't see everything from looking at it on Google Maps. And that's really not going to help a developer understand, is the upper floor vacant? Is there a parking area behind? Is there parking on the street? Is there a really nice facade? Is it a brick building, a wooden building? And so those are the kinds of things that we looked at to try and take what is in the GIS system, which is a lot of assessor data. We also were fortunate, Erin worked with us with other resources within the city hall to get building permit data, to get condition data. And we spent a lot of time talking also with the redevelopment authority, learning about their target properties and getting databases. So it really was a collaborative effort. And what this next map shows is some of the many different maps that came out of walking the site. And so one of them, which we kind of decided to do along the way, was this parking inventory. And as I'm sure many people know, that seems to always be one of the big questions. What's traffic? And oh my God, there's not going to be any parking spaces. So this parking inventory was interesting in the sense that, again, we started on the ground, which is parking allowed on one side of the street or the other. Is parking actually striped? And are there any cars in those parking spaces? So we were able to provide that to our GIS people, who then took that data and measured how big parking spaces should be. And they were able to determine that there was probably only 65% of the parking capacity being used in the South Holyoke neighborhood. And so therefore, this information essentially is the ammunition for Erin's office and the city to use when developers come in their door. So some of the other maps that we're showing here is overall condition maps. We also looked at value in this map as to, high and low values, so that we could see whether or not there were any trends in the neighborhood. And then the next one, we looked at, I think I had mentioned that we looked at sites that the redevelopment authority had already targeted. So we, and then this site takes the redevelopment parcels, but also vacant parcels or parcels that, based on the criteria that we used from walking the neighborhoods, we were able to say this is a candidate for redevelopment. And Erin, again, he mentioned that we're hoping that another phase of this work is going to be looking at how the ground floor is being utilized, and if there is vacant upper floors, is that a possibility for housing development? And then this one was flood risk, but there are, I believe, something like 26 different maps. They're all electronic, and Aaron in his planning department, economic development department, redevelopment department, they now have all of this information at their fingertips. So he also briefly mentioned that we are targeting 5 different properties in the neighborhoods that the collective we, all of us on the team, came together, and we wanted, our criteria was we wanted to make sure that we had properties that were both in the flats section and in South Holyoke. We wanted properties where there could be big and small development. This is a mill building here. This could be a bunch of row houses put in here. This could be a multifamily, development. This could be a redevelopment. And again, this might also be more townhouses, multifamily infill houses, which are pretty traditional in this community. So, our next step in this process is really talking about what the attributes of those properties are, and perhaps looking how they could be financed, and that will become part of the toolkit. So it has been really a wonderful, I believe, a really good collaboration. We were fortunate that on one of our days when we went on the ground, Aaron connected us with a community group that was going door knocking. So we were able to get information from them as well. Just a flavor that you wouldn't get sitting, back in your office. We also, we have, in talking to the landlords, we heard, what are your concerns? What are your frustrations? What are your hurdles? So we're hoping to take all this information that we've gathered and put it together in this toolkit and in our final report, so that it will hopefully meet the goals of the HUB program, which is further the creation of housing development. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you,
Oh,
Lynn.
sorry.
That's all right.
Aaron, sorry about that. Aaron, do you want to do the OneHolyoke building inspection?
Sure. I think, yeah. And if you want to add something to it.
Absolutely.
So as was mentioned, we partnered with our CDC, OneHolyoke CDC. They own 22 properties in the South Holyoke Flats. They brought on an inspector to give a capital overlay, a capital investment budget that would be needed to upgrade and improve their properties. Again, looking at stuff, as we all know, roofs, windows, insulation, overview of the plumbing, HVAC. Again, also grading those exteriors. We want to take advantage of facade improvement grants and other opportunities at the state. So they were able to get that information with the Neighborhood Hub grant as well. We partnered with them. And then they're taking all this information and making it into, again, working with Lynn and her team, how do we create a map of the properties with those physical needs, prepare budgets for them so they can start to go out, put together the funding, whether through grants, private investments. And again, this map information, so critical. So again, having OneHolyoke obtain bids using these maps to invite those developers, to invite those investors in the way that they can move this, move these improvements. And we see it as a partnership, because if they improve their properties, we get infill property, landlords start to see development happen, start to see improvements happen, they start to do more too. So as with many of our neighborhoods, I'm sure similar to Fitchburg, Brockton, there's lots of potential, but no one takes that first step. So again, if OneHolyoke can be an anchor in a neighborhood, and we can do the infill, we can really have a transformative change to the neighborhood. And then of course, they'll be working to recapitalize their properties, again, with the aid of the developers toolkit that will be provided as well. So I think do they have another? I think that's it, right?
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, we did our on the ground study did not study these 22 properties, because we knew that Mike's office was studying them.
Right.
And we see a real opportunity for that, because all of the properties are going to be mapped, and all of the needs on those properties are going to be mapped. If they go out to bid and they want to bid somebody for roofing, they can see that 16 of the properties need roofing. So we're hoping that it's going to aid, be a real aid in getting bids that are have economies of scale. And I believe, with regard to recapitalization, the portfolio is very under leveraged right now, which is fantastic, but there are major capital needs. So most likely they will be looking to do some sort of a scattered site recapitalization of the property. So we're excited. It's the first time I've actually been using mapping to help with financing. So it's kind of a new way of approaching it.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, we've really been able to, we moved really fast on this. So again, we're in a point now, we're putting together the toolkit, the maps are getting worked on, and then we're going to sort of focus on those 5 properties. So thanks everyone again. And we wanted to leave time for questions. So I think we're handing it back over to Lynn or to Don.
Yes, thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Lynn. That was excellent. We have about 10 minutes for questions. I don't see any questions yet in the chat, so please put your questions in the chat. But I do have a question I will get us started with. And this is a question for folks in the city of Holyoke. So this would be Aaron or Lynn. My question is this: much of the effort relies on a strong partnership between the city of Holyoke and OneHolyoke CDC, which existed before this specific initiative was started. My question is, what are the keys to building a strong working relationship between city government and a local community-based organization?
Well, great question. I think it's, hopefully it's obvious and elemental. I mean, we can only do so much as the city. We're not developers. We try not to be landlords, although our redevelopment authority does often own property and works on land lease agreements. We're limited to what we can do. And so having those partnerships, especially a CDC, expands our ability. So we want to coordinate if we're even beyond the neighborhood hub, but if we're going to coordinate with them, when we're looking to move city property, OneHolyoke and the Holyoke Housing Authority and some of our other developers in the area are our go-to. So we know that they can get the job done. We know that they do good management. We know the track record. So when their RFPs, when their applications on RFPs come in, we pay attention and we try to coordinate and make sure that if they're working on a certain area, we want to make sure that we're doing all we can to make those efforts in that area the best they can be. So I think you have to have these partnerships because again, we're limited. The city's limited by our capacity, first off, but also secondly, what we can actually do. We're not developing housing. If we know in our urban renewal plan says we need housing here, we're going to go to our go-to organizations that can get it done.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. I have a question for Francis. Holyoke is one of the 5 gateway cities with which the hub is working, and you described the 4 themes in terms of what the cities are looking to accomplish: organizational improvements, reuse plans and strategies, regulations and incentives, and property identification and prioritization. My question, excuse me, my question is, from this experience, what are the most important factors in determining whether the state-city partnership is likely to succeed?
That is a wonderful question. So I think what I've learned so far from this first iteration is there has to be that that serious interest and it has to be really driven by by the city and by their partners. Like working with the Holyoke team's been wonderful because everybody's on the same page. Everybody is vested in this. So it's really. It's hard to get anything done when there is lack of agreement as to what a project needs to be, where there is even just communication, when it's hard to just get folks in the same room to discuss things. So really looking for partnerships that are even if they're new partnerships, just that everybody is equally interested in doing this work and willing to put in the time. again, since this is not just a take the money and run program, but we do expect each team, each city to put in their time and talk to us, talk to each other. And I also do want to say, I forgot to mention, but we are in the midst of putting together the neighborhood stabilization program, which is the capital side to the hub program. So that actually provides funding for projects, for specifically smaller scale projects to be able to pencil out. So we are working on that, and one of the priorities that we expect to have is that communities that go through the neighborhood hub will sort of get a bit of a leg up in that they'll already have something that they're working on. So again, technical assistance is sort of only the beginning, right? We want to actually get things done. So I'm excited that the NSP will provide an additional resource, but we are also looking at the work that Christine is doing with TOD, the underutilized lots program that Mass Development has, and all these other funds to really get towards the development side of it.
If I could just jump in real quick, Don, I would just add, and I love obviously Francis's last comments there, because the first time we did this presentation, I sort of mentioned this is all great and getting the data is great, but there's no implementation money, then it's all for naught in some ways. So it's great to see that there'll be some opportunities for funding. But I also want to just mention, and Francis had mentioned it, but for me, especially in this position as someone who was in the Gateway Cities Caucus for 8 years, being able to connect with the other cities in this program has been really great. I'm learning what they're doing, what's going on in Fitchburg and Brockton and the other places. I've seen their cities from one perspective, and now working with my counterparts at those cities and hearing their challenges and the differences of how they're approaching them has been really helpful for me as well.
And I just wanted to kind of, say a few words kind of to both of these questions about working with, because it sort of is a four-way partnership with the consultants and the CDC and the town and MassHousing. I think one of the things just to keep in mind to hopefully have more success with is to be flexible in what the scope of work is. As we mentioned, Aaron came in, the scope was kind of already out there. Then we came in and we needed to really focus the scope on housing and not necessarily commercial or economic development. These are large grants, and the wonderful thing is that you can take it, one step at a time and, do an initial study that will lead to more studies. And I think what Francis said that is really key is that everyone is focused and has the time to give. We would not have been this successful if Aaron hadn't opened all of the doors to City Hall to us in a really quick and timely manner. So I just add those couple words of wisdom as to why I think we're hopefully going to continue down the right track.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you. Those are all great answers. And not seeing any other questions in the chat, I will use the moderator's prerogative to ask one more question. And this is to anyone, to Francis or Aaron or Lynn, which is, to find my question, do you see this neighborhood stabilization work in Holyoke continuing once the formal partnership between the hub and the City of Holyoke concludes? And if so, describe what you envision after this formal partnership ends. And that's open to any of our presenters.
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, again, I don't want this just to be another study and a bunch of maps that sit on the shelf. So, whether it's through MassHousing loan or grant programs, be it facade programs, be it code upgrade programs, that's a big one for us. One thing I'd like to throw out there is I'd love to see something similar to like the Brownfield Remediation Fund, where there's a fund created that cities can go to have some backing to some hard to move, hard to develop properties. Sometimes just doing the electrical upgrades, and getting things up to code can be $500,000 before you put up any drywall or do any build out. So a lot of these opportunities, especially out here in Western Mass, the gap is an issue. And then of course, if there's more consulting opportunities and more ways to get more information to developers and even keep a robust toolkit, we'd love to obviously continue working with Lynn. It's great to create those relationships with consultants and to get to add on to their work instead of starting over with somebody else. So for us, from our perspective, if we do any kind of other RFP and LDS applies for it, obviously they're going to have a leg up, as you mentioned, because they're familiar with the area. It's important for us, since we're going to utilize people not just always based in Holyoke, to have people familiar with what's going on in Holyoke. And one of the things that Lynn's team did bring to the table, they had worked with the Holyoke Housing Authority previously, I think, on a capital needs assessment. So they had some familiarity with Holyoke, but now they're really getting more intimate, more familiar with the project. So if we're able to work with them again, that'd be fantastic.
Francis or Lynn, anything to add to that?
It's really up to Holyoke to decide what Holyoke does. but obviously, we'd love to continue this partnership in different ways. We have many different financing programs at MassHousing. We will have, the other NSP will be available starting next year. But again, always thinking of how we can support our different partners, thinking mix of TA and capital, what other programs, we have to get the let out program that's available to specific homeowners, but really looking at what we can do to either evolve or iterate what we already have. So yes, I'm expecting to have a long relationship with Aaron and Lynn, regardless of this specific program.
And
Great.
just to add one thing, I feel that I've learned, as Aaron mentioned, from what the other municipalities are doing. We've learned about what the challenges are in Holyoke that are sometimes different than what we see in suburban or eastern, Mass communities. And I think that this program is going to reach beyond just what we're doing in Holyoke, in the sense that, we need to start conversations about, the different kinds of, funding issues that go to putting that infrastructure in place, that go to clearing credit. That's a huge thing, hurdle towards homeownership in Holyoke. They have the income, but they need to get credit. So I see this as an amazing, if you will, gateway to larger conversations throughout the Commonwealth. And I'm really quite tickled to be part of it.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Aaron and Francis and Lynn, for your thoughtful presentations. Thank you to everyone for participating in the conversation. And I will turn things back to Christine.
Thank you, Don and Aaron, Lynn, and Francis. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Mike join us. I hope it's maybe because of the storm we just had. I know that we have another panelist coming up that also lost power, but will try and join us. But that was a really great discussion, and we will be sharing the materials after the meeting and the recording as well. And we're at 10:55. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break for us to get ready for the next session, which we will be covering another set of state tools, including HDIP, the Housing Development Incentive Program, and Commonwealth Builder. And Dave Tragorth is going to be joining us as well. If Emma, you could bring up the session slide for now. Dave is going to be joining us by his cell phone because he lost his power. But we will take a quick break and return at 11 o'clock. Hey, everybody, we are at 11 o'clock and we're going to return to session 2. And it looks like we have all of our panelists joined us, even under circumstances where Dave does not have power. But so we really appreciate everyone joining us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for session 2. First, we have Bill Railt. He is the principal planner of smart growth programs at DHCD. In addition to working with gateway cities to establish and amend housing development zones and plans and reviewing associated tax increment exemption agreements under the Housing Development Incentive Program, Bill's other primary responsibilities at DHCD is administering the Chapter 40R smart growth and starter home zoning programs. Prior to his current role at DHCD and since joining the department in 1997, Bill held several different positions involving a number of housing, planning, and economic development programs and initiatives. Also joining us from DHCD, we have Stephen Pantalone. He is the housing program specialist, and he works on DHCD's affordable programs as well as the HDIP program. He has been the primary contact and reviewer for HDIP programs since 2017 and assisted in the transition to the competitive funding round format. Joining us from MassHousing today, we have Brett Watson, the Senior Relationship Manager and Originator at MassHousing. He joined MassHousing in June 2008 to lead a new department that is responsible for coordinating all comprehensive permit programs, municipal engagement, and planning issues for the agency. Recently, he transitioned to the Rental Business Development Division at MassHousing, serving as a Senior Relationship Manager and Originator. He has over 25 years of municipal planning, community development, and affordable housing experience. Greg graduated from Clemson University with a bachelor's in history and political science and obtained an MPA degree from Clemson University and the University of South Carolina jointly. And last but not least, we have Dave Tragorth, principal of Tragorth Companies. Dave Tragorth is a real estate consultant and developer focused on developing projects that require a combination of public and private investment to be successful. He's developed several transformative projects in the gateway cities, including Chelsea, Haverhill, Worcester, for example, and he's used nearly every federal, state, and local funding resource available to advance projects, including HDIP, historic tax credits, Community Preservation Act funding, to name a few. We're really glad to have our esteemed panelists join us this morning, and we are going to start off with Bill as our first speaker.
Actually, Christine, I think Steve is going to lead off, and because he really handles the bulk of the program, and I will chime in on the aspects that I'm involved in, sort of mid presentation. If Steve is,
yeah. So I'll open up the PowerPoint and I'll start us off. I'm assuming everybody can see this. Okay, let me just do the. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the presentation slide, but this thing on top is blocking me. There we go. All right. Yeah, thanks. It's great to be on this panel. I think the HDIP program has been a really good tool, and I've worked with it for a while now, and seen a lot of these projects, which have really improved underutilized sites, really helped some of the downtown areas in these gateway cities. So we're excited to be part of this. So I'll start with just a history of the program because it has changed, which has really helped its popularity over time. So 2010 was when the legislation was passed. It was really in response to municipal requests to get more market rate housing in the gateway cities. And so it started off as the tax increment exemption, so that really hasn't changed. But it started off in terms of the credit is being 10% of qualified project expenditures up to 2 million, so the lesser of. And it started allocation of 5 million per year. And so it's always been this dual incentive of a local tax exemption plus a credit then that people can use. Either a lot of people syndicate it, or I have had some people use it on their own returns. And so 2013 was really when we started seeing projects come in. We had some great projects early on, including from Dave. But I think it was a little bit limited, and it was also limited to rehab and less than 50 units. And so we had interest in it, but we weren't using all of our allocation. And so over time, there were some changes to the program. So in 2014, larger projects could be included, but it was still that same 10% of qualified expenditures. And then in 2016 was really when the value of the credit piece of the program really increased. And so the statute was amended, so it included new construction or allowed for new construction, and also raised the credit cap to 25% of qualified project expenditures. We also, acquisition is not a qualified expenditure, but early on, some of the site improvements, we didn't allow it to be included in the calculation, and those were included. And so I'd say in that 2016, with that added value to the program, we started to see a lot of interest in it. And with these projects, they sort of take a little while to develop. So I would say that added value really increased the popularity of the program. And then in 2017, 2018, we started to see a lot more people coming into us. I should also note that the allocation increased to 10 million per year. So I would say 2017, 2018, we still weren't using all of our allocation per year, but we did see sort of increase in traffic into us. And it would be, we would see projects that would come to us interested in the program, then we wouldn't hear again from them in another year. But I would say that 2018 and forward, we started having projects that would come to us, and a higher percentage of them were real projects that ended up following through with an application. And so 2019, 2020, we started using all of our allocated HDIP credit of 10 million per year. And sort of like we do with LIHTC, it's forward committing. So if a project came to us in 2018 and expected to finish construction in 2020, they would get a 2020 allocation of the HDIP credit. And there's just so much demand, which I'll talk about a little bit further down in the slides or in the presentation, but we just have so much interest and demand in the program right now that we can't really meet the credit needs of people that are coming to us. So we have transitioned to a competitive format where previously applications would come in on a rolling basis. We would review them, have back and forth. Now we're going to a funding round format like we do with our LIHTC, where we'll receive all the project applications at once and determine which ones to award. That's the history of the program. Just a basic overview. The HDIP program, as it came out of requests from market rate housing and gateway cities, it's really a partnership between the municipality. And whenever someone comes to me, the first thing I always ask is, have you talked to your city? Have you talked to the municipality? And do they support it? So that's really important. Obviously, at the state, we have to approve, and Bill will talk a little bit about this, cities create an HD zone, which we have to review and approve. And then we're obviously involved in we review the TIE agreement, the tax increment exemption agreement with the city, and then we review the application for that and the credit. So it's really a partnership with city, state, and then of course developers working with us and working with their cities to meet, what the city's needs, and also working with us to answer questions we have in our review. The components, as I mentioned, there's a HD zone. That's the first step for a city to use the program. A TIE agreement, so that's a negotiation with a developer and the city, and both of those things, certainly the HDIP zone and the tie agreement really need to be in place when they come to us with applications, so that we know that the city is fully on board. So these are really two distinct incentives in terms of the local tax exemption and then the credit piece, but they're tied together, of course, because we review and approve the tie. To date, everyone who's been approved through DHCD for a tie has also utilized the credit portion. We haven't had a developer fully come through or go through the process where they only got the tie agreement approved by us. People have asked us about it, and I've told people, pleaded with people sometimes, if you can figure out a way just to do with a tie because the credit is so stressed, please let us know. But those are two distinct incentives, but they both have to come through us to be approved. And this last point is the project certification. In the implementation guidelines and the regulations, it notes a 3-stage process: a preliminary, conditional, and final certification. Since we're moving to a funding format, obviously those aren't changing, but sort of how we do intake changed a little bit with this last competitive round, in terms of we had a pre-application, which is similar to what, again, we do with our LIHTC funding rounds. And then we sort of combine preliminary and conditional certifications. And then the final certification is once a project is awarded credit by us, tie agreement approved, and they finish construction, they would come in for a final certification, which would be when they're 80% leased up, have a cost cert, and we provide a final certification with a unique tax identifier, which is what the developer is really after at the end of the day, and that's what they can use to get the credit. Some of the key program criteria, it is really meant for market rate housing. We do have some affordable units in some of our deals, which usually come at the request of the municipality, but it has to be at least 80% market rate units. It can be rental or ownership. We only have one ownership project that's currently under construction. Well, it's really wrapped up now. And I think they've just about sold 80%. But that's the only condo project we have. Most people use it for rental purposes. It can be a mixed use. It's probably 50-50 in terms of projects that have a commercial portion. I mean, a lot of these buildings are sort of underutilized in the downtown areas of these gateways, so they might already have a commercial space on the ground floor. So that's fairly common. I touched a little bit on the tie only versus using that and the credit. And we talked about the credit. And that's the max. So, in the credit is obviously a very stressed resource right now. So, folks that are in the round now may or may not get that, maximum amount that they're allowed to under the statute. And then we talked a little bit about the final certification process. And then I'll turn it over to Bill to sort of talk about the HD zones and tie agreements. And Bill, just let me know when you want to.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Can people hear me okay?
Yep,
let me
we
know
can hear you.
if there's a problem. So first off, I just want to say that while Christine, we wear, many of us wear multiple hats at DHCD. And while Christine mentioned that I also work on the 40R program, I do have a new colleague, Becca George, who her contact information will be listed on the last slide as well. And I'm handling the sort of community development division piece of this presentation this morning. Becca is going to be taking an increasingly visible role in the program. So please take note of her contact information. So as Steve mentioned, in order to have a certified project, you first got to have an HD zone, and also actually an accompanying plan that goes along with that zone. And while the requirements for that have gotten a little, or for the plan anyway, it's a little easier now that the definition of what a market rate unit is has loosened up a bit, or was loosened up during some of the changes that Steve went over. We do need that, and we have 22 out of the 26 gateway cities, as you can see, have at least one HD zone. I would say that in general, most of them are fairly large geographic, cover maybe, the downtown or the downtown and, another older historic commercial or industrial area. That said, we do have some very small ones that are really tailored around a single project, like Quincy, and then some very large ones like Salem, and Fall River has a couple of HD zones that are fairly large. And they extend from the Cape Cod, Barnstable on the Cape, all the way to Pittsfield in the Berkshires. And for the 4 communities that don't have HD zones, we're and are interested, we are always available to help them through that process of establishing an HD zone. One thing I will say too that add is that sometimes communities will start out small with a more discrete geographic area and then amend them. So we work through that process as well, and that's generally goes pretty smoothly. I think we can go to the next slide, Steve. Thanks. So the tax increment exemption agreement, which is the one piece of sort of the one of the certification requirements that my division, community development division, works through. And we have templates for that. As Steve mentioned, almost all the projects have been rental to date, but we can provide you with that template. And the tie, which is an agreement between the municipality and the project sponsor, needs to be approved prior to by DHCD prior to execution. But really, with this transition to the competitive round, I think that Steve and Housing Development want to see that you are that the municipality and the sponsor have engaged DHCD with the review of the tie, prior to the application for the competitive round, and you can submit your draft tie at any time, really, despite the competitive round cycle, in advance of the competitive round cycle, I should say. The exemption percentages can vary, and they do vary in duration. Has to be at least 10%, but not more than 100% of the incremental value of the market rate units. The duration needs to be at least 5 years and not more than 20. Some of the more common things that we get hung up on sometimes, and sometimes either requires that we issue a waiver, or if we get a tie late in the game, or if sometimes we have to go back and amend the ties. But there are fairly specific definitions of certain terms, such as base value, which we encourage communities to pay attention to. And again, consult us as early as possible. As soon as you think you have a project and the municipality and the sponsor have kind of come to a general agreement about supporting the project and what the tie schedule might be, to reach out to us with that draft. And also there is another thing that comes up is the effective date, which is July 1st of the first fiscal year following DHCD's final certification. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And the tie does include an exhibit 4 is a confirmation of basically certain elements, the critical elements of the tie, and that must be submitted prior to the request for final certification. And I'll turn it back to Steve now.
Great, thanks, Bill. So just some of these sort of already discussed, but just a quick thing. So if you're considering the HDIP program, and a couple points here, so make sure you're in an HD zone. I have had people ask me if they are, and I usually say talk to the city, make sure that you are. Make sure you have city support. It has to be at least 2 units. It ranges. We have projects with 300 units, and so I think there was an application in the most recent round for 4 units. So it varies, but at least more than 2 units, at least 80%. And then when it was first come, first serve, it's really for projects that have a gap and obviously need the credit to make it work and need the tie. I think some projects, maybe they don't quite qualify for federal, so they can use it in that circumstance, or sometimes just because of the rents and whatnot, they need the credit to make it work. But it is really supposed to be the amount that you need, to make it financially feasible. And so I think this is what a lot of people are most interested in. So like I said, there's tremendous demand. We've filled all our allocations. So we already have projects where we're starting to get to the point where they're going to finish, let's say in 2021, but we didn't have enough credit. So they got 2022 credit. So they're going to have to wait until January 1st, 2022 to get that final certification from us, even though they finished in 2021. So it's just a very stressed resource. So we have to go to a competitive basis. So, there'll be a competitive round where all the applications come in. I think this last round, the due date was in August, and we are hoping to have decisions by the end of the year. So I think we're expecting to have a funding round in 2022, but we don't yet have that date. At the 10 million a year allocation, like I said, it's just very stressed. That's not enough to meet the demand of what people are asking us for. So we will have funding round in 2022, but I, at this point in time, can't provide a date or a month. And how many rounds we'll have per year, all of that is TBD for the future. So if you're interested in the HDIP program as a developer, if you're a municipality, any questions, you can just email me. That's the best way to reach me. And certainly if you have a project, if you're a municipality or a developer and you're interested in a tie only project where you're not seeking credit, just please reach out to me. And we can go from there. So we have, I just have a couple examples, some data and some examples. So 32 projects have been completed with the HDIP program is 2,000 units. We have 21 projects right now that are under construction or, are just finishing up. So, and then 3 projects that kind of came in right before we made the move to the competitive round. And we had 14 projects submit for the 2021 competitive round. So you can do the math. If each of them requested at least 1 million in credit, you can imagine that, that's more than a year worth of our allocation. So there's a lot of interest in the program. Some of our completed projects, this building was in Pittsfield, one of the early ones, a rehab. This one as well, the flats, this was an early one in Chelsea, the Edge in Lowell. This is the Heights in Haverhill. So these 2 were new construction. So that's kind of when we switched over these more recent. The Heights has a great view of the river there in Haverhill. This was a rehab, another rehab in Lowell, the Waterhead project. And here's our contact info. So I think that wraps it up for us. I don't know if we're doing questions now or later, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Stephen and Bill. We're going to move on to the next presenter, Greg Watson, who's here with us. And if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the presentations. Take it away, Greg. Greg, we can't hear you. I hear something now. You
Hey,
tried.
better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's very faint, but we can hear you.
Okay. Try this again. Okay, well, thank you, Christine. Hope you can hear me better. I'll try to speak a little bit more clearly. Thanks for the introduction. So MassHousing's Commonwealth Builder program is an attempt to get at the challenge that Massachusetts has in terms of finding an affordable homeownership project and program for moderate income homeowners. While we do a pretty decent job of finding solutions to rental housing challenges in the Commonwealth, we have done a much better job of finding those solutions in the homeownership space. The market just isn't producing new for sale products for new homes that are attainable to moderate income households. And we see this creating a really big disparity in homeownership rates between white households and households of color within the Commonwealth. There still is a strong demand within those communities of color for new high quality homes, and the market just isn't meeting that challenge. This is a good illustration of just how far we are in terms of not meeting the ability to provide good home ownership opportunities to communities of color. Not one of the areas that you want to be a leader. And in Massachusetts, it is more than likely that a white household is twice as likely to own a home as opposed to a non-white household. Exacerbating all of these issues is the fact that Massachusetts just fundamentally has a difficult time producing housing of any type. And you can see here that between the period of 1960 to 1990, we did an okay job of developing some opportunities for new housing, but that has significantly tailed off in the past 30 years. And we really are suffering from the ability to produce any kind of new housing. So to meet all of those combined challenges, MassHousing has created the Commonwealth Builder program. We started with $60 million to create incentives for developers and communities to come together to create the opportunity for new high quality homeownership development in communities of color. We are hoping that by spurring the market to engage in that way, that we will start to address some of the issues of that racial disparity in homeownership, promote more investment in these communities, and start to build, for the first time in many places, intergenerational wealth. So our goal is simple. It's the creation and production of these new homeownership opportunities. We are hoping to accomplish that in the gateway cities across the Commonwealth, as well as in the city of Boston and certain qualified census tracts. Our initial goal was for that to be 500 new units coming out of that $60 million investment. The program operates with a few simple guidelines, and that's something that we share on our website and that you can reach out to me and members of my team to find out more about. But just generally speaking, target affordability ranges from 70 to 120% of AMI. There is a minimum of 20 units that we're hoping to create with each allocation of Commonwealth Builder funds, and 10 of those units being set aside as moderate income. We provide up to $150,000 in subsidy per unit with a per project cap of $5 million. And we are hoping that there will be opportunities to provide less for some developments so that we can spread these funds around a little bit more to other projects that also need them. We are targeting first-time home buyers, and we are not looking to do age restrictions with this program. There are preliminary restrictions for affordability that in everywhere else in the Commonwealth are for 15 years and operate off a deed restriction that is very similar to the Fannie Mae Universal Deed Rider that people see in other affordable homeownership programs, including Chapter 40B. D&D has their own separate program, and their affordability restrictions will look different than that. We do look for a subsidy contribution of some form from the local host community. That can be in kind in addition to actual funds committed. And in Boston, that's going to be distributed through the D&D. So how do you engage with MassHousing in this program? You can start by, again, reaching out to the business development groups in either the rental or homeownership teams at MassHousing, and we will work with you up front to help first better understand our program, and then help you as you're assembling your team and looking to acquire land and funding. We can offer letters of support specifically for funding rounds that might be of assistance in. We also will help you to offer a term sheet when you are going to your construction lender and have a firm budget in hand. And then once the application and all of your sources are put together, we will take that into review, and that's done at the staff level as a way of expediting this process through this program. We do not have to go to the MassHousing board for approval of each of these commitments of funds. And that does help in terms of being able to move and be a little bit more flexible as projects are ready to move forward. Once the commitment has been made, we'll send a letter and enter into a grant agreement with the developer, or in the case of the City of Boston, those funds will be distributed through the neighborhood development group. So we have a number of years now where we've been working on this program, and we've really just started to get some momentum under the program in terms of projects being developed and created, and the pipeline is really just getting underway. We have right now over 30 projects in 8 different municipalities across the Commonwealth, represents over 1,200 units, 750 of which would be moderate housing. We have a couple projects that have already gotten underway and are selling units, and a couple more recently committed, with several currently under review. And we are very hopeful that in the near future, the initial investment of $60 million and our preliminary goal of 500 units of production will be enhanced. House Bill 3922 would look to take $200 million in ARPA funds that would come to the Commonwealth and further expand on the opportunity under the Commonwealth Builder program, further expanding the overall number of units that we are hopeful that could be created with this program. There's also a couple of examples here of developments that we have funded recently, including one that I just worked on, 2147 Washington Street in Roxbury, which is a great project that gets at a number of income levels. It's mixed use, and there are all kinds of different funding that came into that, including our rental workforce housing, Commonwealth Builder funds. There's a commercial space for the community known as Haley House that has been kind of an institution in that neighborhood for a number of years. So kind of a cool project that brings a number of projects together. And transitioning just real quickly to talk about our rental corollary to middle income housing challenges on the, again, rental side of the equation is our workforce housing program. Here we have the ability to provide $100,000 per unit up to $3 million per project. There's initial affordability terms of 15 years. That's according to our statute, although that may be longer depending on programmatic requirements. We are looking for a return on that investment somewhere ranging between 0 and 3% of interest. And that will depend on what kind of funds are going into the program and how much affordability overall is being leveraged by potentially other sources. And the money can come back to MassHousing either through a structured repayment schedule or some combination of cash flow sharing. Income ranges are going to be between 60 and 120% of AMI. And we do have some flexibility depending on where the market is to set some units at market rates. Again, this was an investment initially of $100 million from MassHousing's balance sheet. And we are looking to do the kind of production that will allow this to be a form of subordinate debt to leverage another tier of affordability in developments across the Commonwealth. And again, the affordability will be somewhere between 15 and 40 years, again, depending on other sources of funding in the project. Where we are up to this point with 5 years of having administered the workforce housing program is that we have already closed on over $106 million in projects and funds that have been awarded, with another almost 26 million committed. So that's a pretty good accomplishment so far based on that initial commitment of $100 million. We still have a very active pipeline of just under 59 million, and that is growing. It seems like most of the projects that we are starting to work through right now have an interest in adding more workforce housing to it. There is a pretty good geographic distribution through the program, and we've been able to get out to at least 64 different communities over time. And we hope to continue to bring this into more places than just Greater Boston, where there is this obvious kind of concentration right now. Another real success story in workforce housing is its ability to get at income levels that cover a wider range of affordability than what we see in some of our traditional affordable housing sources. And what you see here is the beginning of starting to see some of those other AMI tiers start to create some progress in different communities. Still leveraged here by a lot of more traditional programs. So the 60% AMI part of this chart is, I think, reflective of the fact that most of the deals that get rental financing in the Commonwealth still get a lot of low-income housing tax credits and other forms of soft debt that continue to drive more low and extremely low income households. A couple examples of workforce housing in action. The first deal that we ever did was the Gateway in Lynn. And this is a great transit-oriented site in a great location with all kinds of amenities nearby. The Homes in Beverly is another great TOD site with a really great impact on that neighborhood and the community in general. And my personal favorite, the Watson in Quincy, is a development where we gave a pretty substantial investment of workforce funds. We bent our own rules here and got up to $7 million in workforce funds to create a lot more affordability than what would have been the case otherwise. And all of these projects are having a great impact on their communities. And we look forward to continuing to work with both developers and members of the community to shape your communities through some of these financing opportunities. Thanks a lot.
Greg, thank you for that great presentation. And next up, we have Dave Tragorth from Tragorth Companies. And I'm not sure if Dave is joining us by phone or computer, but I have agreed to share his slides on his behalf and have him walk us through his presentation. So I'm going to do that now.
Hey, Christine, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
I'm on my phone, but I can see you guys. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And apologies for a little bit of chaos over here as we're going on 36 hours without power or internet. But what I wanted to do is sort of just give a real quick case study in how this actually gets implemented in the project specific context through JM Lofts, which actually was happy to see was on Steve's slide deck. Just by way of background, I actually worked with Jay Ash and Chelsea on the first HDIP project, Flats at 44, back in the day when we could build for $150 a square foot. That number is now, and that was probably only 8 years ago, and that number is now probably 250, 260 or more, even more if we're working in Boston. I'm also working in Worcester on a 7-unit historic conversion using HDIP and historic tax credits. And then 142 Main and Brockton we're just purchasing. And actually there, for all the reasons Steve stated, we're trying to stay away from HDIP because of the oversubscription, and would love to see more money come into that program. It's definitely needed. So we're working in a bunch of places, but just wanted to highlight this one. And then also, I guess one other thing as well is we are trying to put together a Commonwealth Builder project in Chelsea as well with some home ownership, and can talk about that at the end. So if you move to the next slide, this project up in Haverhill, well, this is just some projects I've worked on. We can skip that. Pretty nice, pretty buildings all over the place, in a lot of different communities and gateway cities, and we're exclusively in Massachusetts. But JM Lofts was like just this centrally located right in the heart of what is Haverhill's main shopping area and commercial area, and it was vacant on the upper stories since it was a shoe factory. I actually jumped, early in my development career on a mass development bus tour and had never been to the Merrimack Valley, and actually found JM Lofts, and kind of crazily purchased it for $350,000 in 2014, with like zero contingencies, and mostly on the assurances, honestly, from the city of Haverhill, that permitting was going to be okay, and mass development, that they were going to really support us as one of our first projects on our own, and completed, from a development perspective, in lightning speed. I would say, 2014 purchased, did the gut rehab in 2015, and opened in 2016, and we still own it, and it's just a fantastic project. It is in a 40R district as well, which was helpful from a permitting perspective, and Bill's on that side, as he mentioned. And then we had off-site parking with the MVRTA garage, sort of a large enclosed garage, which is a big issue in many municipalities. You've got these old sites, buildings take up almost all the site sometimes, or parking is very problematic. Haverhill came with a solution, which was tremendously helpful, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. So if you go to the next slide, this is what it looked like. They were selling typewriters out of the ground floor when I showed up, and all vacant upstairs. Next slide. And one interesting part about this as well, and these historic buildings a lot of times have ideal retail sizes for small local businesses. A lot of times the reason that they're vacant is because they need so much capital investment to get them up to code. But we were able to create 3 really nice bays of ground floor retail at this building. That next slide is occupied by some great tenants. Also, a lot of times these old buildings do lay out really well for residential. And we were able to fit, 1 and 2 bedrooms in a very, very efficient footprint for this building in particular. And this project was so successful that Haverhill came back and said, "Hey, can you work on the next one over?" And we did that one, finished that up about 2 years ago in the same kind of format and play. Next slide. To get into some of the sources, this was back, and you can see, those of you who do run the numbers can see how much this has changed. It's a 6 million, 6.5. This is the real challenge we have, right? And why these programs exist. It costs about $6.5 million to do what we did at this building back however many years ago. If we were talking now, that number would be more, probably like 8 million. And if you just take rents and equity, you could see that that's about 3.4 million of the $6.4 million cost. And so, a normal, typical developer would say, well, this project doesn't pencil, I'll go look at another project. But we have expertise in pretty much, and as Christine mentioned in the bio, we've used probably every federal, local, state resource in a variety of different projects that are available. And on this one, we used historic tax credits and the Housing Development Incentive Program, which at the time was only 10% of basis and much smaller than it is now. And also just deferred a bunch of fees as well to make the project work. So you can see, permanent loan equity project doesn't work. When we started to layer in the historic tax credits and everything else, it starts to make some sense. Next slide. This is also, it's kind of interesting to look back. Our rents now, when we were pro-forming this, we were thinking rents, and this is sort of as a municipal, audience, I think this is interesting to sort of like, okay, what do these projects actually do? And where do you see them go over 5 to 6 years? These rents were pro forma at $1,400 starting for 1 bedroom. Those rents are now in the $1,900, $2,000 range. 2 bedrooms, well over 2,000, mid 2000s. Back in the day, we could only underwrite them at $1,400 and $1,500. Commercial space as well is about the same, or honestly even less. And we can talk about that in a minute. But these really do set a market that also make other projects feasible. People look at, people have used JM Lofts as a comp to develop future projects. And you kind of have to have somewhere to start. And JM Lofts was one of them. Next slide. And made possible by, HCIP. So the results of this project, we leased up the project and really quickly. We had the retail leased to Battlegrounds Coffee, locally owned coffee shop. We've had a couple of tenants in that middle spot, which is an interesting story just about how you get small local businesses and you got to be willing to help them along. And sometimes they fail and you got to pick up and go find somebody else. But Battlegrounds Coffee has been a staple there. And then the Switchboard, which is an art consulting and gallery, has also been a staple in the building. It's just had a tremendous impact on Haverhill's downtown. We did have challenges. We tried to incorporate a live work unit in the ground floor. That didn't quite work. We had old infrastructure in the street. That was a challenge. I think some of the things that were really important, and I think this has become sort of my mantra across all the places that I work, is you have to have a really supportive municipal and state government. Because if you go to a state government and you say, listen, my debt and equity, it just doesn't work. And they say, well, tough love, or we don't have anything, or we don't know, then that person walks out the door and they go to the next community. But if there's a real knowledge and effort to work together, something can happen, like JM Lofts. Also, the pre-packaged parking solution was critical from a political perspective, and then buildings that have dimensions that are efficient and high, allow for that high quality design. We learned a bunch of lessons, and many since, but retail is hard. I think we all know that, but there's some great strategies and some great tools that are coming out. Main Street, one thing that I like to say is Main Street should be the amenity for these buildings. I'm not big into putting lots of amenities into our buildings that just sort of gobble up, yoga studios and bike, spin studios. I want to get our residents out onto Main Street into small businesses. And then, federal historic tax credits were critical here. They are becoming harder to deal with, but hopefully with some legislative changes that are coming, both with HDIP and the historic tax credit program, those will get a bit of the boost that they need. Next slide. So, what's the outcome of all this? I mean, I think the outcome is we went from a completely vacant building, to one that has all kinds of pedestrian activity, vibrancy, and life. And next slide. And I guess you can gauge that by, going on Instagram and seeing what's going on in Haverhill, and the Switchboard, one of our tenants, arranged for this national mural program to come to the side of our building and put this amazing mural up. It's just been a transformative sort of experience, I think, for this block, and really showed what can happen when you put these programs to use. And next slide. And next slide. And then this is the project that we did, next slide, just down the street. Same thing. It was much more difficult to do, to be honest, because people saw our success down the street and said, oh, well, our building must be worth twice as much. So it was harder to get. Construction prices had gone up. And there's a real struggle right now to get these projects to pencil, even with the historic tax credits and HDIP, because construction prices have climbed so high. But I think we're all working on it on this call. Next slide. And I think that might be it. One of the things that I wanted to touch on briefly is about Commonwealth Builder, and we're trying to put together one in Chelsea right now. And I think one of the challenges we've seen is, while $150,000 per unit seems like a lot, and it is a lot, it doesn't fully cover the gap. And a lot of these localities don't have enough to add to it to cover the rest of the gap. Boston does. And that's why I think, in some of the maybe wealthier communities can add on to the Commonwealth Builder program. But we have had really great discussions with MassHousing, who's a longtime partner with us, to figure out how to overcome that challenge in places like Chelsea and other gateway city communities where, they're in the Boston metro area. So, housing prices are kind of set at that, but construction prices are also really expensive. So it creates a bit of a challenge. But thanks for the time. And happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. We have about 5 minutes or so left, and we're going to transition over to some Q&A. And folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have first question from Katie. I think this one is for Greg. Can you provide examples of municipal commitments, especially infrastructure?
Is this municipal commitments to other like programs like the Commonwealth Builder? What communities have done?
Yeah.
So yeah, we've seen a range of things here, and in the city of Boston, it's a little bit more straightforward. They have done things like channel some funds through the Department of Neighborhood Development, but we've seen some of the infrastructure even be partnerships with both the municipality and the state on getting water and sewer to the state, helping with fees and the fee structure that comes with that, there can be a number of different in-kind contributions, beyond just an infusion of cash. I think one of the things that is another area for hope here is that as ARPA funds start flowing into both the state and municipal governments, that there'll be another source that people can allocate for exactly that gap that Dave was just mentioning, and going beyond our contribution on Commonwealth Builder. So, there's some flexibility built into the program and the process that allows for a range of ways to kind of get at what a municipal contribution could be.
Thank you, Greg. I have a question from Liz Murphy. She's curious about the projects using Commonwealth Builder for condos mixed with rental housing. Has mixing ownership and rental been successful?
Yeah, one of the example programs that I highlighted, 2147 Washington Street, is a really good example. Not only does that include mixed tenure, but it also includes a mix of uses with a commercial space on the ground floor. So it makes it more challenging for us, but we kind of like dealing with those challenges. We really kind of treat it simply with a condo structure to separate how the funds come in to the different portions of the development. But that was 2147 in Roxbury was a good example. We just funded another deal this month called Morton Station Village in Mattapan, which also combines both workforce and Commonwealth Builder. So I don't know if that's going to become a model moving forward, but there have been a few recent examples where we have paired those resources and created both opportunities.
Great, thank you, Greg. I had another question come in about the HDIP program, and given the oversubscription and high demand of the program itself, are there any HDIP applications that make it more competitive than others?
I think we don't have particular criteria. I mean, our architects' reviews are certainly green design is great. We like transit-oriented developments, but we don't have any particular criteria. I mean, we see all different types of projects. So I think overall, sort of the best project you could put forward, but there's nothing we particularly look at.
Thank you, Steve. Phil, do you have anything to add to that?
I really don't. Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sort of, again, when it comes to the specific projects, other than the fact that the project needs to be in the zone, obviously, again, my role is really limited to reviewing and approving the ties.
Thank you. I have a question coming in from Jim, and this is the last question we're going to take before wrapping up. Jim is asking, there have been any Commonwealth Builder scatter site projects built or in the pipeline? This one's for Greg.
No, we are specifically trying to avoid scattered site within the Commonwealth Builder program. And that's something that, at least for now, programmatically, we have not entertained. So we haven't seen our pipeline look at a deal with that component in it. We have done it on the rental side, but that's not something that we at least have currently contemplated with Commonwealth Builder.
Again, thank you everyone for attending today. We will be sending out the materials and the recording after the event. And for next week, we are going to be covering a couple more topics. We're going to be focusing on creating opportunity with local assets, specifically balancing investment and displacement, as well as leveraging public land for affordable housing. So if you are interested in those two topics, please go to our website at mhp.net to register, or you can go to tinyurl.com/ GCHI 2021 to register. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us and for all the panelists for sharing your expertise today. And we hope you have a great rest of the day.